Welcome to Libertarian Counterpoint. I am your host, James Just. With me today is John Cameron and Jason McPhee. Gentlemen, we've got some interesting news and so
I'm messing with you, folks.
Oh, there we go, John. You're on live.
I'm live. Yeah, I was pretending that my mic wasn't working. Never mind, folks. You don't need to know why. But I was just pretending. But it's apparently working. Yeah, and they do this all the time. Well, first of all, you got the Fed, which is basically leaving the goat to guard the cabbage patch, because the Fed was basically created by a bunch of banksters to watch the banking industry. And so they had these easy money policies, a big growth, lend money to anybody, keep interest rates low. And they also, people lost track of the fact that this wasn't one of the super banks too big to fail. They actually have a name for them. You like B of A and Morgan Stanley and Credit Suisse and Chase and all the rest of that. They won't let them fail. But this bank, even though it funded an awful lot of Silicon Valley, wasn't on that too big to fail list, even though I think it's 27th in the nation in assets or something. And they also forgot, a lot of these depositors, that individual depositors only covered up to $250,000 by FDIC insurance. And, so of course, the federal government, the politicians that get huge support from Silicon Valley had to cover their buddies' backs, or else their buddies would have cut off the political slush fund that keeps getting them elected, and their buddies might have stopped censoring, stuff on the internet that, puts them in the spotlight as idiots. So they covered way more than that $250,000 for people. And used to be, if you wanted money to be in a bank and wanted to be safe, you had to scatter it around, just like diversifying a portfolio. You don't have all your eggs in one basket. You don't have only Apple stock. Maybe you want to have some not Microsoft, but you might want to have some other stock as well. So if you wanted your stuff covered by FDIC insurance, you'd have it in this bank and that bank and this bank. That way, if one bank fails, your FDIC comes in up to the $250,000. Or you could be smart and put it in your local credit union, because FDIC insurance is like, 1.5% on the deposit, something like that. My credit union's the credit union is near 5%, even though they do the same kind of leverage lending, and they're all smaller. So have your credit union. And if you're stupid enough to have $251,000 sitting in a bank, then you need to talk to your financial planner anyway.
Well, I think part of the problem was, at least with the Silicon Valley Bank, there was a lot of businesses in Silicon Valley that were using that just to do their regular payrolls and everything else, and so that those were the ones who were really going to get hit. Yeah. And of course those are the ones who if we think about a bailout, they're technically being bailed out, by not doing exactly what you said, maybe being a little bit judicious about where you're putting your money.
Yeah. Well, you got to run payroll somewhere, and if your payroll, is $250,000? That's about half an engineer in the Bay Area, right? I mean, well, maybe it's engineer and half, depending on how long they've been in the business. So you got to run payroll somewhere. But when a bank starts to fail right when you got to run payroll, and then they put a freeze on these huge accounts as the money's moving through, what are you going to do?
Well, that was part of the problem with this one. They have enough assets, but what they didn't have is enough time to liquidate those assets and to make them liquid so they could actually pay the debts. That was actually kind of the problem.
And they were borrowing short and lending long, too, which is a recipe for disaster. And
they were borrowing long. They were buying 10 years bonds at 1.5% interest rate, while the interest rate is at 7% now, whatever it is. So they were literally losing money because they invested in long-term bonds. They were invested in long-term bonds because they got an influx of cash because of the COVID relief and venture capitalism, and so a lot of these Silicon Valleys, they were flooded with cash, but they didn't have any way to invest it safely. So they invested it in the safest thing they could, which is Treasury bonds, but they were only 1.5%. And when we have the Treasury jacking up interest rates to fight inflation, well, now all of a sudden they're essentially underwater.
And I don't even think it was just the Treasury bonds. It was, I think they had around 60 billion or something in mortgage-backed securities and stuff. And so the problem was
same thing with mortgages.
Yes, it did.
Because a bunch of those are underwater.
Yeah,
as well.
and like within a year's time, we've seen them go from roughly 3 or 4% to 7% or whatever it is that they're at now. And so, I mean, if they had to move those today, these are long-term deals. Then
you have to write them down.
Exactly. Yeah, and so they take a big loss. So if they needed the cash, then
so to get $21 billion in cash, it cost them $1.8 billion. And so they lost a bunch of money in that. You can only do that for so long before you end up with a cash flow problem, which is actually
basically,
what the problem is.
And the Fed created the crisis, and now
the Fed's gonna fix the crisis.
Fix the crisis. And it's politics and banking. The 2008, 2009 crisis, they did the same thing. There was a very independent, fantastically run smaller bank, and I forget what it was, that they let fail because they weren't part of the in crowd, and then they rescued everybody else. And it wasn't small by any means, but they just told them, "You're screwed."
There was the Lehman Brothers thing.
I think it was Lehman Brothers. Yeah. And there was
that
an
the
investment
In
bank.
fact,
investment
I believe
bank.
one of the people who was big at Lehman Brothers was actually working at SVB. Irony of ironies.
And I don't think that is an irony. And we're sitting on a financial house of cards. The whole world is. You've got $1 trillion, I don't know, 10 trillion, 20 trillion dollars of unfunded Social Security debt on the horizon. You've got all of these unfunded public pensions that are guaranteed. You've got the interest on what are we at, 30 trillion in debt now, something like that?
Close to 32.
Probably by the time the show airs, it'll be, this is the live show. It'll be 32.3.
Well, but this is a crazy thing with all this. I mean, we're told essentially that, well, the government has to control the money supply because if it doesn't, oh my gosh, markets would just be too crazy, if it wasn't for...
Maybe they would be crazier than they have been?
Exactly, yeah. And then the governments, well, they need to control the banks because, oh my gosh, you can't let those guys, do whatever they want to do. And of course, here we have government regulating the banks, running the money supply, essentially just out there printing money recently, right? Which is what allowed...
Messing with the interest rates.
Yes.
Whether it's absurdly low for a long period of time and then they're going to jack them up over a short period of time and expect something like this to not happen.
Yeah.
When all of a sudden you have people banks making 10-year investments based upon the theory of low interest rates, and all of a sudden that theory has been blown out the water. Well, unintentional consequences are going to happen. And we still have people not even believing that we're in a recession, right? Yeah. Which is another problem. We've been in a recession
how
for
many
6
people
months
is
now.
Meta laying off now? 15,000. Apple's keeping positions open. All these people want their employees to go back to the office now.
Tech is bleeding money.
Huh?
The tech industry, tech startups are bleeding money. And
well, even mainstream tech outfits are bleeding, and then if you throw in the fact that most chips are made in Formosa, Taiwan, whatever we call it. Yeah,
well, if we get to that, we got China mostly down at the bottom.
Well, so I mean, there's so many problems out there that it's.
Well, but we're in almost a double whammy now, and a lot of it's because of how we handled lockdowns. I mean, we decided to make ourselves unproductive by locking people down at the same time.
And give them money.
Printing out ridiculous amounts of money as well. Yeah. And, a little bit was Trump, and certainly Biden has had his foot on the gas pedal all the way too here. But the bottom line is that we are in a...
You mean they let him drive? Oh, that's a different kind of gas. I'm sorry.
But the crazy thing is we have no room to maneuver at this point, right? Because the Fed wants to ramp up those interest rates, which is what got those mortgage-backed securities in trouble, and so that's to keep down the inflation. But they're finding that we're so leveraged on everything that they've got no room to do anything. They've spent you know, they've.
Some of us were complaining about that these absurdly low interest rates were going to have a high cost eventually, and we're not paying that high cost.
Yeah.
No, I mean we've been talking about we couldn't get Richard on the show. Richard has been talking about on this show. He used to be the executive producer, the producer of the show, right? 15 years, I think we've been talking about this that I remember. It might have been longer than that.
And when is it going to bust?
When is this whole thing gonna fall apart? You don't never know. You know, like when in Rome, I wonder if our viewers know, the reason there are these little ridges on coins is so that people couldn't scrape the silver off and the coin kept getting smaller and smaller unless they put new ridges in it. So people have been debasing currency since currency started, and Rome was fine and not fine. I mean, a lot of wonderful things, great engineering, wonderful agriculture, toilets, you know, bathing, lots of good stuff. But then they started debasing their currency, and it took a couple hundred years for Rome to collapse. But you know, at the end of that collapse, their currency was basically it was pot metal.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, there was very little gold or silver left in it, and there's no gold or silver left in ours. You know, we don't really know how long it will take to collapse. The wonderful thing is the positive news. I will go on a positive rant, and we won't. Yeah, let me just talk about it. You know, if the government would get out of the way, I mean, the government says regulation costs this country $1.5 trillion a year, which means it's more like $3 trillion. You know, the people in this country that need the help to stay away from being homeless are people of color, recent immigrants, you know, felons who can't get a job anywhere, and something like 40% of the jobs in this country now require some kind of license, whereas 15, 20 years ago it was like 8% of the jobs. So if all of that regulation, which is PR says it's to protect us, but you know what it is, it's to protect the people that have those jobs, was removed, and taxes were cut, you know, and all the things that we logically know what to do, within 10 years, we'd be paying off that national debt. You know, I mean, the Brits, despite NHS and all the rest of that, before, and they had a way crazier bureaucracy than we did, and they started paring it down, they were projecting a balanced budget by last year until the Brexit vote. And then the EU punished them so badly, they have what we have, which was, you know, a deficit. But they didn't give away as much money as we did. Nobody did.
Yeah. Well, and regardless of what we're spending the money on, our debt to GDP is as high as it's ever been. I mean, we've surpassed World War II levels of essentially owing more than what we produce every year. And
you know, we're right in line with every other industrialized country on the planet.
Yeah. So, and
so it must be okay.
Yeah. well, and this is why, you know, we're potentially in for a massive reordering of things, which is really kind of scary. But, you know, getting back to what you were saying, the only real way out of this, if there is a way out of this, is if we just become massively more productive, because that's essentially the best remedy against inflation. Is if we produce more goods, then you know, you've got more goods relative to those dollars.
Of course, the problem with that is they just use our inflation, our productivity increases to fund their future stuff. So it doesn't actually end up being helping. We just end up working harder and getting less again. So.
Well, if you can get government out of the picture.
So, Jason, this next one's kind of, you had something to do with this one. You were in town yesterday. In the last couple of days, Turning Point and Charlie Kirk were in Davis and Sacramento to give a talk and to give a speech. And the Sacramento Bee put out an article that was, we'll just call it misinformation. And because of that, there was this big response. And I'm not here one to defend Charlie Kirk or Turning Point USA. I'm not particularly fond of them. But everybody has to have the opportunity to speak. And it's very strange when you have groups of people who claim that they want to create safe spaces for everybody, and then they create unsafe spaces for people they don't like. I mean, there comes a point where you become what you claim to hate, where your desire to create your safe space, the desire to create the world that reflects you, and your desire to do away with people who have a philosophy of hate, but your philosophy has become a philosophy of hate. If you show up someplace to create violence or to try to intimidate people from speaking or listening to people who speak, because sometimes people go to hear someone speak because they disagree with them and they just want to know what they're thinking. And so not everybody's there for the same reasons you think they are, right? So you were part of this. You were there the other day, yesterday, when you kind of.
Yeah, this was I believe this was on Tuesday, I think, and it's funny how these liberal arts institutions have now become illiberal arts institutions because they seem to want to just shut speech down. But essentially, Charlie Kirk was he's doing some kind of tour, and my daughter had some kind of connection with that, so I took her there. Charlie Kirk's more of a conservative. He's not quite a libertarian, but there's some overlap there. And so anyways, but he said the Bee had sort of slandered him the day before or the day of, claiming that he wanted to lynch transgendered people. And so this was, just outright libel, slander, but and they've retracted it since then. But that essentially ginned up.
Bee's already bankrupt. They're going to be even more bankrupt after this one.
Well, I believe they might be, gearing up a lawsuit. I'm not sure, but at the event, it was, kind of crazy. We got there, and you had the mob in black pajamas with umbrellas and masks, and they were
baseball bats.
Yes, well, I didn't notice any baseball bats, but they did break some windows. I didn't witness that.
I watched the police very carefully surround them and cordon, or they maneuvered them down. I was in a coffee house on the corner of 15th and Q as they maneuvered them away from the Capitol, and they went down 15th toward who knows where, but. And I don't mind people being passionate, but when you have to wear a mask to participate in an event, to hide who you are, there's a really good chance you're going to do something illegal. I mean, and the fact that these little wimpy, spineless Antifa kids all get dressed up in their little outfits, that I don't know how they're getting funded, because they get bussed all over and flown all over the place and all the rest of that. And then they put their disguises on, like there was a bunch of them disguised at the January 6th rally. That the fact, if you have to do that, it means you're up to no good. There's a reason that burglars at night put stockings over their faces to disguise what they're doing. They're going to do something that's either illegal or shameless or all the rest of that. If you're not proud about what you're doing, wear a name tag. If you want to be seen on camera somewhere, if you're doing something to be proud of, why not wear a name tag that says, I want you to associate this behavior with me because I'm proud of it. The only reason you disguise who you are is that you're going to do something shameful, and then you're going to dress it up as something good. If it was something good, you'd be proud of it. You want to advertise it, right?
Well, and being there too, these people were far from, high-minded and liberal who were in this group. Now they did have their message on their things, and that's fine, standing out there just shouting what they think their message is. But some of them, people who were walking by, they were just screaming obscenities at them, and just yelling at them, all kinds of ridiculous stuff. So and it's funny too.
Well, this was a non-religious detransitioning group. They were from what I understand, if that's correct, they were speaking about examples of where kids had made mistakes, and they wanted to detransition.
Well, in this particular case, there was a couple of stories here, but the TPUSA thing wasn't really focused on the gender issue. It was just that they had been tarred and feathered before the event, so that riled people up to go attack them for that. So
I think there was two different events. You had the event at UC Davis, and then you had the detransitioning.
That was at the state capitol.
At the state capitol.
Well, you're talking about the UCD one. The one at the state capitol was detransitioning, and this was examples of people who transitioned. sometimes to the point of no return, surgically transitioned, who regretted it because it happened when they were at, and there was speaker after speaker, and I wasn't there, but I talked to some people, and the group that went after him was, there were some Antifa folks there, and they were out for blood.
Yeah. Well, one thing I could say about at least the Davis thing, and it was kind of interesting, is that there was a large security presence there. So they had a lot of security at the gym that they had this. I think they call it Hutchinson Center or whatever it is. I don't know. But then they had a huge number of police there too. I mean, there must have been at least 40 or 50 cops there at least, with equipment on and everything else. So.
Do they have their tank, or no? It's Davis Police. They don't have a tank yet.
Yeah, no, I didn't see anything like that. And I think these were probably Woodland Police that were there. I'm guessing because there was an awful lot of them. I think it's probably more than the Davis
probably
Police
Yellow
Department.
Sheriffs and Davis and.
But it was kind of interesting in that respect, and it was kind of surreal too, because you did see they had an effect on the event itself, because you literally, they locked the doors at 7 o'clock when it started, and you couldn't go in or out. If you left, then you're not coming back in.
But then there wasn't a fire.
Yeah. So so you could leave, but you couldn't come back in if you left. But it was interesting because the seats, they were only about 2/3 full. So I mean, they had planned for more people than that to come. So I mean, unfortunately, the protests probably did have some sort of effect on it.
Yeah, it had some local effect, but also it kind of created a different effect where you've got, you now have exposed or promoted essentially Charlie Kirk and Turning Point USA. You've now actually promoted them, and you've got them going to sue the Bee or likely suing the Bee for slander. That's all kind of, you actually these kind of things, you actually end up promoting what you claim to not want to promote. It's a very strange world. So Biden signs new executive action on expanding background checks, but I kind of read over this executive action thing. It doesn't seem like it's actually expanding anything. It seems like it's just kind of restating what we already do.
It doesn't. It's PR, and that's it. It's a sound bite saying we need to do something about we're gonna punish people who evade these rules. We're going to make sure that they're held accountable if they evade these rules. Well, you're not talking about any new rules. You're just saying that you're going to actually enforce the rules on gun sellers. These marginal gun sellers that don't obey the rules. Well, if they don't obey the rules, pull their license. If they need, you can already do that. And the fact is that licensed guns bought from licensed dealers aren't the issue anyway. Very, very few are. I mean, some make headlines. Like that latest lunatic kid that shot a bunch of people. His parents bought a gun for him because he couldn't buy one. So whose fault is that? The parents, right?
We already have mandatory background checks, which was the big headline thing. We're gonna have mandatory background checks, but we already have mandatory background checks. I went and looked through the thing. I'm saying there's nothing new here.
No.
We're just kind of telling people something that we already do, that we're going to do it again.
Better. We're going to do better. We're actually going to force people to follow the rules that we already have in place. Yeah. Oh, okay. So are there other areas where you're going to say that you're doing that? Oh, all of them. All of them. We're going to do that with all of them.
In some ways, though, it's kind of a blessing, right? That they're literally doubling down on what they've already done, to just say, hey, we're actually serious about it. I'm just glad they're not adding more stuff.
Well, this is true, but who's their audience? The question is, you read the statistics, and you have like 80% of the people think we should have mandatory background checks. But we already have mandatory background checks. So do these people just not know we have mandatory background checks, or are they just answering the question?
Well,
let me
keep in mind where people get their knowledge from. Bill Maher recently grilled 2 people on CNN and said, they did a survey a while back, and when they polled Democrats and asked them when people get COVID, how often do they have to be hospitalized? Democrats thought it was 50% of the time. And they watched CNN. So he was saying, where did they get that information? They got it from you. They got it from you. How are people so misinformed? They're being intentionally misinformed so they can be led around by their nose by these politicians who are only interested in it for the money, you know. And you know, it's going to keep, if people choose to not go out and inform themselves, then they what's that old saying? People deserve the government they get.
Yeah,
you know?
or deserve the government they vote for, something like that. Yeah, something of that nature.
Yeah.
All right, we've got like 2 minutes. So China is ramping up its diplomatic offensive amid the growing U.S. tensions. Essentially, it's all over Taiwan, right? This political fight over whether Taiwan is part of China or whether it's part of itself. I mean,
or China could be West Formosa. What do they call it? They call it, no. They call Taiwan East China.
East China or
something
West
like
China,
that,
something
or
like
South
that.
China or something.
Maybe it's South China. I forget what it is.
Well, you know, and this is the same shell game we're playing with the Ukraine. You know, this is a bright shiny object. Don't pay attention to all the people in China who now don't want a dictator as a ruler and who want some freedom and want to be able to say what they want without getting thrown in jail. And oh, by the way, we're committing genocide against a religious minority and their slave labor. We don't want you to pay. Let's go look at Taiwan. Let's go look at Taiwan.
It's all internal. We view it as external politics, but it's really all internal politics.
Yeah.
It's for internal consumption. It's the U.S. is the bad guy. Western Europe's the bad guy, and Taiwan is kind of the showcase example.
I don't know. China's doing pretty well. It owns Africa now because it made a bunch of loans to these people that they couldn't pay back, knowing full well couldn't pay it back. So they now have access to all these ports. They have all these ports. They have all these refineries, all these pipelines. And I'm talking, so I should shut up.
But there's a problem with that because what happens when those countries go, we're just not going to pay you back.
Now we're going to keep all this stuff. Get out.
Yeah.
Oh wait, isn't that what happened to the U.S. and Venezuela?
All right. Yes. That's how it works. We are just out of time. We want to thank you for joining us. Please like and subscribe and all that great stuff if you catch us on the YouTube or social media. And please remember to love everybody and good night. Thank you, Johnny.
Thank you.